Hey everyone, I'm Roxanne and welcome back to the Living Free from Abuse channel, where knowledge is power. Now guys, there's no doubt about it. Across North America, Black and Indigenous persons are overrepresented in the criminal justice system and in prison populations. According to a 2011-2012 report by the Office of the Correctional Investigator in Canada, Black inmates were identified as one of the fastest growing subpopulations in federal corrections. And despite implementing various policies and initiatives to address racial bias in corrections, particularly focusing on anti-Black racism, a 2023-2024 annual report by the Office of the Correctional Investigator has continued to find that Black and Indigenous individuals are overrepresented in maximum security institutions. According to a 2021 Toronto Police Service report on understanding arrests and arrest outcomes, out of the 1,361 youth involved in arrests, the highest percentage, 45%, were perceived as Black, 29% were perceived as white, 7% were perceived as Middle Eastern, 5% East and South Asian, 3% as South Asian, 2% perceived as Latino, and 0.7% perceived as Indigenous. And the numbers in the United States are even more startling. While making up only 13% of the U.S. population, Black persons constitute 38% of the incarcerated population, according to the Sentencing Project. And according to the U.S. Department of Justice in 2019, of adults arrested for murder, more than half, 51.3%, were Black or African American, 45.7% were white, and 3% were of other racial minorities. Now, while most will argue that the racial disparity in the criminal justice system is due to systemic discriminatory practices by law enforcement and the justice system, here's another very significant fact. According to the Canadian government's Justice Department, Black individuals are not just overrepresented as persons accused or convicted of a crime, but are also overrepresented as victims of crime as well. According to the data, Black people are more likely to report lived experience of physical or sexual abuse during their childhood and are also overrepresented among homicide victims. In 2021, there were 788 homicide victims, of which 31% were racialized, and almost half of racialized victims, 49%, were identified as Black. Black households also have higher rates of domestic violence, second only to Indigenous populations. And according to Gifford's Law Center, Black Americans make up the majority of gun homicide victims in the U.S. 82% of all gun deaths among Black Americans are gun homicides, and 88% of gun deaths among Black Americans are attributed to other Black Americans. So there are clearly more issues at play here than racial bias in the criminal justice system. Now, there's been a trend on social media called #BlackFatigue, where quite notably other Black social media content creators have been complaining about suffering from fatigue from the amount of social and behavioral issues among persons in the Black community.
Now to Black fatigue. It has recently been turned into a feeling that some white and Black people have who say they are damn tired of foolishness of some Black people, the claims of racism from sunup to sundown, loud talking, fighting, and the list goes on. Not my list now, keep that in mind. But some people are tired of the complaints and don't give a damn. Here's what one TikTok user had to say about it.
Black fatigue is a thing. Newsflash. White people don't want to live around ratchet Black people, and Black people don't want to live around ratchet Black people. I mean, it's nothing like going to the Walmart on a Sunday morning, and then you see the bonnet crew walk in. Loud, obnoxious, the kids are everywhere, in every aisle, unattended, and that's anywhere you go. No matter what, they're highly emotional, highly sensitive. You can't say nothing. You can't even smile and hold the door for them because they'll look at you like you're crazy.
If Black people in general don't hold each other and others accountable for our and their actions, there will be no change within our communities. The destruction of property and violence, the need to be extremely fucking loud and ratchet for no reason.
No one's staying silent about it any longer. No nationality wants to be involved or bothered by this loud, obnoxious group of people. No one, not even hard-working Black Americans. I mean, I'm telling no lies here. Everywhere that group of people go, chaos follows.
Essentially, black fatigue is a growing weariness of the actions of the quote-unquote black community.
They have no self-respect and no self-control. They go around unaliving, essaying, stealing, robbing. They don't care about each other. They don't take care of their neighborhoods. And they definitely don't take care of themselves. They don't care about their appearance. They outside loud and obnoxious. Bonnets and mink lashes, extremely long fingernails, sagging pants, smelling like an overwhelming odor of marijuana.
People are tired of the black community. It is what it is. Even black people are tired of the black community. That should tell you something. But they just call us derogatory names just like they call white folks. People are tired of seeing the same shit over and over again. And if they say anything about it, it's racist. If they want something done about it, it's racist. If they want justice for a crime that was committed by the black community, racist.
It's not racist to call black people out for their behavior and what they're doing to society at this moment.
Either you stepped on a shoe, you looked at them wrong, you told them good morning. They're never happy, they're never satisfied. And you wonder why normal, good black people move out of the hood as soon as they start getting successful. Crab in a barrel mentality, never take accountability for nothing.
So what are the common complaints being mentioned here? Lack of self-control, aggression, violence, emotional volatility, disruptive behavior, and lack of law and order. Well, here's something interesting I'd like to show you. There's actually a mental health diagnosis called Antisocial Personality Disorder, and it's in the DSM-5 as an official diagnosis. It's characterized by impulsive, irresponsible, and often criminal behavior. Here's what the Mayo Clinic has to say about ASPD. Antisocial Personality Disorder, sometimes called sociopathy, is a mental health condition in which a person consistently shows no regard for right and wrong and ignores the rights and feelings of others. People with antisocial personality disorder tend to purposely make others angry or upset and manipulate or treat others harshly or with cruel indifference. They lack remorse or do not regret their behavior. People with antisocial personality disorder often violate the law, becoming criminals. They may lie, behave violently or impulsively, and have problems with drug and alcohol use. They have difficulty consistently meeting responsibilities related to family, work, or school. Here are some of the listed symptoms: ignoring right and wrong, telling lies to take advantage of others, not being sensitive or respectful of others, using charm or wit to manipulate others for personal gain or pleasure, having a sense of superiority, and being extremely opinionated, having problems with the law, including criminal behavior, being hostile, aggressive, violent, or threatening to others, feeling no guilt about harming others, doing dangerous things with no regard for the safety of self or others, being irresponsible, and failing to fulfill work or financial responsibilities. Adults with antisocial personality disorder usually show symptoms of conduct disorder before the age of 15. Symptoms of conduct disorder include serious ongoing behavior problems such as aggression toward people and animals, destruction of property, lying and dishonesty, theft, and serious violation of rules. Does any of this sound familiar? Here's another uncomfortable fact. In a 2024 study on racial and gender differences in the relationship between psychopathology and arrests, it was found that Black Americans had significantly higher scores on assessment of antisocial personality disorder and composite aggression than white Americans. In a scientific paper in the Journal of Criminal Justice on race and antisocial personality, it was found that race differences in crime and violence in the United States have long been seen to be dramatic, but criminologists have avoided offering explanations due to political correctness. In a 2008 study by researchers at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, Go-King Hu, Daniel Webster, and Susan Baker analyzed trends from 1999 to 2005 using CDC data and separated the firearm homicide mortality rate per 100,000 by race and age group. For 15 to 9-year-olds among whites, the highest highest rate was 7.0 and the lowest rate was 6.2. Among blacks, the highest rate was 56.4 and the lowest rate was 48.5. In other words, the lowest black rate was nearly 7 times higher than the highest white rate. For 20 to 24-year-olds, among whites, the highest rate was 10.7 and the lowest rate was 9.0. Among blacks, the highest rate was 106.1 and the lowest rate was 94.2. In other words, the lowest black rate was nearly 9 times higher than the highest white rate. For 25 to 9-year-olds, among whites, the highest rate was 8.4 and the lowest rate was 6.7. Among blacks, the highest black rate was 93.1 and the lowest rate was 74.4. In other words, the lowest black rate was nearly 9 times higher than the highest white rate. But on this and many issues relating to race, criminologists have been mostly silent due to political correctness and fear of being labeled as racist for offering explanations of black-white differences. In Matt Delissy's paper on race and antisocial personality, personality functioning is critical for understanding behavior in most domains of life. Hans Eysenck's PEN model highlights psychoticism, extroversion, and neuroticism as the big 3 components of personality. Extroversion typifies individuals who seek stimuli from their environment to increase their arousal level and are characterized as lively, active, assertive, sensation-seeking, carefree, dominant, and adventurous. Neuroticism is characterized by a tendency toward negative emotions. Neurotics are anxious, depressed, guilty, tense, moody, emotional, and have low self-esteem. Psychoticism is a dimension that most explicitly had antisocial traits and is characterized by a person who is tough-minded, aggressive, cold, egocentric, impersonal, impulsive, antisocial, unempathic, and creative. Auke Tellegen in 1982 developed the multidimensional personality questionnaire, which also looked at constraint, which is characterized by self-restraint and the inhibition of emotional and behavioral responses, and is comprised of lower order factors of harm avoidance, traditionalism, and control. Paul Costa Jr. and Robert McCrae developed the 5-factor model of personality that contains 5 dimensions: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. High scorers on agreeableness are good-natured, trusting, soft-hearted, helping, and altruistic. Low scorers tend to be cynical, rude, uncooperative, irritable, and manipulative. Conscientiousness is characterized by organization, persistence, control, and motivation in goal-directed behavior. High scorers are organized, reliable, hardworking, self-directed, ambitious, and persevering. Low scorers are aimless, unreliable, lazy, careless, negligent, and hedonistic. Based on data from the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent Health, R.W. Blum et al. In their 2000 report, The Effects of Race, Ethnicity, Income, and Family Structure on Adolescent Risk Behaviors, found that Black and Hispanic youth were more likely than white youth to engage in violent conduct, whereas white youth were more prone to internalizing symptoms, including suicide attempts. In a 1992 study by J.E. Hastings and L.K. Hamburger on Black and white males who were participants in a domestic violence abatement counseling program, Black males scored significantly higher than whites on measures of narcissism, paranoia, hypomania, drug use, and psychotic delusions. Blacks were also more aggressive than whites and have been rated as having more antisocial personality features and aversive attitudes than whites among probation officers. And guys, like I've said before in multiple videos I've shared, child abuse and adverse child experiences are a predictive factor in behavioral issues and mental health disorders in adulthood. In a 2021 study published in Psychiatry Research, Associations Between Childhood Trauma, Parental Bonding, and Antisocial Personality Disorder in Adulthood, antisocial personality disorder is strongly linked to childhood abuse and neglect. Experiencing abuse, whether whether emotional, physical, or sexual during childhood, significantly increases the risk of developing ASPD later on in life. And as I mentioned in the report by Canada's Justice Department, Black people are more likely to report lived experiences of physical or sexual abuse during their childhood. There's something called the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, conducted by the CDC. And here's the ACEs pyramid to show you the domino effect of adverse childhood experiences, which leads to social, emotional, and cognitive impairment, which leads to the adoption of health risk behaviors, which leads to disease, disability, and social problems, and then early mortality, which we have in the Black community due to the high number of Black youth killed by gun violence, among other issues. Now, whose fault is it? Child abuse can really be a vicious cycle because a child who suffers abuse from their parent or caregiver can grow up to be an emotionally maladjusted adult who, because of that emotional maladjustment, can end up being an abusive parent to their own child. But there are interventions that can be made, and certainly recognizing one's own adverse childhood experience, being abused at the hand of caregivers, one can make a choice to say, I know what that kind of abuse did to me psychologically, and I don't want that for my children. And many people are able to stop that generational cycle. I mean, you have several famous success stories. Oprah Winfrey being a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, who then used her own platform as a journalist and talk show host to educate people as much as possible about child sexual abuse. I mean, Tyler Perry, Queen Latifah, Maya Angelou, Antoine Fisher, whose life was adapted into a movie starring Denzel Washington. It's difficult, but it is possible. But people, in order for interventions to be made, we have to recognize that within the Black community, we have a problem. And this is not just a problem in North America. The problem of crime and violence expands globally to most, if not all, Black majority countries. Here's a world map showing the rate of intentional homicide per 100,000 people. And there is sub-Saharan Africa and the Caribbean with all that red. Here's a world happiness map showing global happiness levels in 2024. And again, here is Africa with a lot of darker purples. Now, a lot of people are going to object and say, it's not fair. It's generational trauma that was caused by the transatlantic slave trade and colonialism. Now, this isn't to say I don't believe systemic racism exists. It certainly does. But the reputation our community has made for itself in terms of the level of crime and violence associated with it has certainly played its role in making persons snap to the prejudgment that this person is probably a criminal, this person is probably violent, this person is going to rob my store. And listen, there's actually something called victim syndrome. Now, while it's not an official diagnosis in the DSM-5, it is, however, a recognized concept in psychology. And it describes a mindset where a person consistently perceives themselves as a victim, even when evidence suggests otherwise. Individuals with victim syndrome tend to believe that their lives are controlled by external forces and that they have little personal agency. They attribute their difficulties to the actions or failures of others rather than taking any personal responsibility. They have a pessimistic view of life and in some cases use victimhood as a form of manipulation to elicit sympathy and gain attention while avoiding taking responsibility. And Black people certainly like to blame the whites of today for the ills of their colonialist forefathers.
Like, y'all really need to stop the victim complex. It looks embarrassing, first of all. And second of all, it's just, doesn't it get tiring? Magnify every single white person to see if they're racist towards you or not. The truth is, y'all don't want racism to end. Y'all want it to live on just so y'all can get victim points. Like, that's literally the truth.
And always the victim of something. Either you stepped on a shoe, you looked at them wrong, you told them good morning. They're never happy, they're never satisfied.
We are in 2025 now, and we are being judged based on the content of our character and not the color of our skin.
And drawing attention to the concept of an evil, all-powerful enemy, the cis, heteronormative white male, can certainly effectively distract from the ills of the Black community. So much so that if there is no hateful white enemy to be found, one shall be made up. In 2023, during the lead up to a mayoral election in Colorado Springs, two people, Ashley Blackcloud and Derek Bernard, were both found guilty for conspiracy to defraud and conveying false information when they made a video showing a burning cross in front of the campaign sign for mayoral candidate Yemi Mobilati. Turns out the whole thing was a hoax deliberately set up to drum up sympathy for Mobilati. Mobilati was not involved whatsoever with the cross-burning hoax. Then you have situations like the curious case of Carmelo Anthony, a 17-year-old African-American student charged with first-degree murder after allegedly stabbing another teenager, Austin Metcalf, at a high school track meet in Frisco, Texas. With Austin Metcalf being white and Anthony being black, racial tensions have been in the air. But in a case where Anthony was clearly the aggressor, daring the other teen to touch him after Metcalf asked him to leave, and then stabbing Metcalf in the chest with a knife Anthony brought with him in his backpack, black activists have still been rallying around Anthony and his family, touting the incident as a case of self-defense, even raising money for Anthony on social media and holding a press conference where Anthony's defense advocate even disparaged the father of the victim for being present at the conference. Even in a case where this teen has now been indicted for first-degree murder, somehow he's still the victim. But here again is another classic case of antisocial behavior. Why did this teenager bring a knife in his backpack to a track meet?
There was this kid, before I knew his name now, this kid was sitting under our tent at track. We asked him to move. He started getting aggressive and talking reckless. And my brother stepped in and said, "You need to move." He's like, "Make me move." Austin grabbed his backpack. The kid, I tried to whip around as fast as I could, but I didn't see the stab.
Police say as Metcalf went to move Anthony, Anthony pulled out a knife and stabbed Metcalf in the chest. Metcalf died in his twin brother's arms.
People, I'm glad you're hearing this from a black woman. And even with all the studies I've shared, I don't just get my data from academic papers. When I moved back to Jamaica in 2005, after not being able to complete my master's because of mental health issues, I ended up doing a lot of volunteer work in low-income urban communities in Kingston. I said, God has brought me back to Jamaica, so this is my mission field. I was an after-school homework teacher at the YWCA in Almontown. I did prison ministry both while I was at Swallowfield Chapel and later as a Seventh-day Adventist at Andrews Memorial SDA. I was a Sunday school teacher at a children's ministry in the Sandy Gully area. I volunteered in helping with occupational therapy activities at a seniors home in Vineyard Town, and I was also an after-school homework teacher at a women's center near Tivoli Gardens. So there's a lot of anecdotal experience I have to back up the numbers. The gangs, the gun violence, the indiscipline.
When there's no efficient judicial system, that means there's no rule of law. When there's no rule of law, there's a high crime rate because there's really no expeditious systematic consequences for crime. So why obey the law?
Jamaica no blah no there. No law is in Jamaica.
Now you can say that black and indigenous populations are overrepresented in the criminal justice system of white majority countries like the United States and Canada and parts of Western Europe because of systemic and structural racism and discriminatory policies and practices by law enforcement. However, if this is the case, why then are white majority Western countries the #1 destination for most non-white migrants and refugees? The fact is, based on the Human Freedom Index and other rankings, white Western European countries like Switzerland, New Zealand, Estonia, Denmark, and Sweden are frequently cited as leaders in human rights. These nations generally score well on indicators like personal, civil, and economic freedoms, as well as rule of law and political rights. And though they're not the head of the pack, Canada and the United States still score high on the Human Freedom Index. Though, of course, with the reinstatement of the Trump administration, there is growing concern about the guarantee that racial minorities have access to due process and a fair trial. The Human Freedom Index uses 86 indicators to assess freedoms related to the rule of law, security, movement, religion, association, expression, and more. So while Canada is 13th out of 160 153 countries in its Freedom Index rank, the Canadian government employs anti-oppressive policies and diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives to address systemic discrimination and promote equal opportunities. The Employment Equity Act mandates federally regulated employers to actively pursue equitable hiring practices, and organizations across the country have been developing frameworks and tools to integrate anti-oppression principles into their policies and practices. Yet there are still huge racial disparities when it comes to our incarcerated populations. Now, never one to leave on a sour note, it's undoubtable throughout the centuries that Black populations throughout the African diaspora have made indelible contributions to society in all aspects of public life, and particularly in music, the creative arts, entertainment, and athletics. The best entertainers and athletes the world has ever seen have hailed not only from Black communities, but from harsh social and economic circumstances facing seemingly insurmountable odds. And there is still a wealth of potential and talent that even now is yet to be unleashed. Facing the real issues and challenges that affect the Black community does not injure us, but instead ensures that the correct resources and interventions be made today so that our future has nothing but possibilities.